They say the river remembers every secret buried beneath its waters. In one village, 3 sisters traded love for gold and pushed their own blood Abena into the silent depths. The next morning, the river gave them riches beyond imagination. But wealth is never free, because when night fell, the river began to whisper their names, asking for something far more precious in return. If this story draws you in, don't forget to like and share your thoughts below. In the western lands, where the red earth meets the restless waters, there stood a quiet village called Ankobra Bend. The people there believed the river was alive, not just with fish and currents, but with memory, spirit, and judgment. They said the river watched, listened, and never forgot. Among the villagers lived 4 sisters, daughters of a fisherman long gone, and a mother whose strength had been buried with him. The eldest was Ajoa, a woman whose eyes always searched beyond what she had, as if the world owed her something greater. She carried herself like a leader, but beneath that strength lived a hunger that never slept. Then there was Efua, sharp-tongued and quick to scorn. Where Ajoa desired, Efua resented. She watched others with narrowed eyes, measuring their joy against her own emptiness. Her laughter was rare, and when it came, it often carried bitterness. The third sister, Ya, was quieter. She followed more than she led, her spirit soft like clay not yet shaped. She feared conflict, feared loneliness even more, and so she often bent to the will of her older sisters, even when her heart trembled in protest. And finally, there was Abena. Abena was different. They said she was born on a Tuesday, blessed by gentle rains, and from the moment she opened her eyes, there was something about her that calmed storms both in the sky and in the hearts of those around her. Her laughter was light, her words kind, and her presence carried a warmth the village had come to cherish. Abena, the elders would say, "Your spirit walks close to the river." And perhaps it was true, for often, Abena would sit by the water's edge, her feet brushing against the cool current, her head tilted as if listening. Sometimes she would smile softly, as though the river had whispered something only she could hear. "What do you hear?" Ya once asked her, sitting beside her one quiet evening. Abena's eyes remained on the flowing water. Not words, she said gently, more like feelings. The river feels alive, like it knows things we don't. Ya shivered slightly. "That sounds frightening." Abena turned to her with a calm smile. "Only if you have something to hide," but not everyone found comfort in Abena's connection. Ajoa watched her from afar, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Every compliment Abena received felt like a thorn in her side. Every smile directed at Abena deepened the silent resentment growing within her. Why is it always her? Efwa muttered one afternoon as they returned from the market, their baskets lighter than they had hoped. People greet her as if she is some kind of blessing. Ajoa's jaw tightened. "Because she plays the part well," she replied coldly. Kind words, soft voice. "It makes people blind." Ya hesitated before speaking. "But she's kind," she said quietly. Efwa scoffed. "Kindness does not fill an empty stomach." The 3 sisters fell into silence, but it was not a peaceful one. It was the kind that grows heavy with unspoken thoughts, with comparisons, with envy that festers like a wound left untreated. That night, as the village settled under the watch of the moon, the river flowed as it always had, steady, endless, patient. And near its edge, Abena sat once more, her fingers trailing through the water. For a brief moment, the current shifted, not violently, not loudly, but enough for the river to notice her, and perhaps enough for it to choose her. They say fortune does not arrive with noise. It slips quietly into a life, like a shadow at dusk, waiting to see who will recognize it and who will misuse it. It was on a morning washed in pale gold that Abena found the bracelet. The river had receded slightly after the night's rain, leaving behind damp earth that shimmered under the rising sun. Abena walked barefoot along the bank, her woven basket resting lightly against her hip. She had come as she often did, not just to fetch water, but to listen. The air was still, too still. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Abena paused. Something caught her eye near a cluster of smooth stones. At first, she thought it was a reflection of sunlight, but as she stepped closer, her breath slowed. Half buried in the wet earth was a bracelet, gold, but not the kind the traders brought from distant cities. This one carried weight, not just in metal, but in presence. Its surface was etched with patterns that twisted like flowing water symbols, that seemed to move when looked at too long. Abena knelt slowly. "Who left you here?" she murmured. The river gave no answer. Yet, as her fingers hovered above it, the current behind her shifted. A soft ripple spread across the surface, though no wind touched the water. Abena hesitated. Then gently she picked it up. The moment her skin touched the gold, the river stirred, not violently but deliberately. A low hum seemed to rise from the water, deep and ancient, like a voice too old to form words. The surface shimmered, catching the sunlight in a way that made it look almost alive. Abena gasped softly, pulling her hand back, but the bracelet remained warm in her palm. Alive, that was the only word she could think of. She stood there for a long moment, heart beating faster than it should. Then, as if guided by instinct, she slipped the bracelet onto her wrist. The reaction was immediate. The water surged forward, not enough to reach her feet, but enough to acknowledge her. The current twisted, forming a brief spiral, before settling once more into calm. Abena stared, her breath shallow. "What are you?" she whispered. Behind her, a voice answered. Something that was never meant to be taken. Abena turned sharply. Standing a few steps away was Nana Essie, the oldest woman in the village. Her back was bent with years, but her eyes sharp, and knowing missed nothing. Abena quickly lowered her hand. "I didn't take it," she said. "I found it here." Nana Essie stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the bracelet. "The river does not lose things," she said quietly. "It gives, or it claims." Abena swallowed. "Then maybe it gave this to me." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Nana Essie shook her head slowly. "The river does not give gifts, child," she said. "It makes bargains." A chill ran through Abena's spine. "I don't understand." "You don't need to, Nana," Essie replied. "You only need to remember this. Nothing from the river comes without a price." Abena looked down at the bracelet. It gleamed softly against her skin, beautiful and unsettling. Still, she said nothing, because deep down, a part of her did not want to let it go. And somewhere beyond the trees, unseen, but not unaware, 3 pairs of eyes had been watching. Ajoa lowered her gaze slowly, her lips curling into something that was not quite a smile. Efwa leaned closer, whispering, "Gold, real gold." Ya's voice trembled. "We should tell her to return it." But Ajoa shook her head. "No," she said, her tone quiet but firm. "We should thank her." Efwa glanced at her. For what? Ajoa's eyes darkened as she looked toward the river. "For showing us where our future lies." And in that moment, as the river flowed on as if nothing had changed, the first seed of betrayal took root. They say betrayal rarely begins with hatred. It begins with a whisper, a small voice that tells you you deserve more. That evening, the compound felt different. The air was warmer, the cooking fire brighter, and for the first time in many days, laughter filled the space where silence had once lived. Abena noticed it immediately. "Ajoa," she said softly, "you seem happy today." Ajoa turned, her face lit with a smile, so gentle it almost felt unfamiliar. "Can a sister not be happy for her own blood?" she replied, her voice smooth as palm oil. Efua chuckled beside her. "You found something special today, didn't you?" Abena hesitated for a moment before lifting her wrist. The bracelet caught the firelight, casting golden reflections across their faces. Ya's breath caught. Even up close, it looked otherworldly. "It's beautiful," Ya whispered. Adjoa stepped closer, her eyes fixed on it, not with wonder, but with calculation. "Where exactly did you find it?" "By the river," Abena answered. "Near the stones where the current bends." Efua exchanged a quick glance with Adjoa. "And you just took it?" Efua asked. "I thought." Abena paused, recalling Nana Esi's warning. "I thought maybe it was meant for me." Adjoa's smile widened slightly. "Then perhaps it is." There was something in her tone that made Ya uneasy. That night, long after Abena had fallen asleep, the three sisters sat close to the dying fire. The shadows danced across their faces, flickering like restless thoughts. "It's real gold," Efwa said under her breath. "Do you know what that means? We could change everything." Ya shook her head quickly. "Or we could bring trouble." Nana Esi said. "Nana Esi lives in fear of everything." Adjoa cut in sharply. "That is why she has nothing." Ya looked down. "Still, it belongs to the river." Adjoa leaned forward, her voice lowering. "And what has the river ever given us? Hunger, struggle, empty nets, silence." Efwa nodded slowly. "We deserve more than this life." Ya's voice trembled. "But Abena is lucky," Adjoa said coldly. "Too lucky." The words hung heavy in the air. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Adjoa continued softer, now almost persuasive. "Think about it. If the river chose her once, it can choose again. There could be more gold where that came from." Efua's eyes gleamed. "More than enough for all of us." Ya hesitated. "So, what are you saying?" Adjoa leaned back slightly, her expression unreadable. "I'm saying we return to the river tomorrow, together." And Abena Ya asked. Adjoa's gaze hardened. "She will show us where the gold is." The next day, the sun rose bright and unforgiving, as if it already knew what the day would bring. Abena Adjoa called sweetly, "Come. We should give thanks to the river. It has blessed you, and by extension all of us." Abena smiled, unaware of the weight behind those words. "Yes, that would be right." Ya forced a weak smile, her hands trembling slightly as she gathered her things. As they walked toward the river, Abena felt something strange. The air was heavier, the wind quieter. Even the river, when it came into view, seemed darker than before. Still, she stepped forward. "For gratitude," she whispered. They stood at the edge of the water. Adjoa placed a hand on Abena's shoulder. "Show us," she said gently. Abena stepped closer to the familiar stones, her feet sinking slightly into the damp earth. "This is where I found it," she said. Efua moved behind her. Ya froze. "Adjoa," Ya whispered, her voice barely audible. "We don't have to do this." But Adjoa did not respond. Instead, she nodded once, a signal. Everything happened in a single breath. Efua lunged forward. Adjoa pushed, and Ya did nothing. Abena's eyes widened as the ground disappeared beneath her feet. "Adjoa." There was no anger in her voice, only confusion. Then the river swallowed her. The splash echoed louder than it should have. And then, silence. No struggle, no cry for help, just the sound of water returning to stillness. Ya's knees buckled. What have we done? Efua stared at the surface, her chest rising quickly. It's done. Adjoa said nothing. She only watched the river, waiting. For what? Even she did not fully understand. And beneath the surface, unseen and unheard, the river accepted the offering. They say when the earth drinks innocent blood, it does not stay silent for long. It waits, and then it answers in ways no one expects. At first, the river gave them exactly what they wanted. The very next morning, Adjoa returned to the place where Abena had vanished. The air was thick, heavy, with something unseen, but she ignored it. Slowly, she stepped toward the water's edge, her heart beating with a strange mix of fear and anticipation. Then she saw it. Gold. Not just one piece, but several. Small nuggets rested among the stones, glistening beneath the shallow current, as though they had always been there. Adjoa's breath caught. It worked, she whispered. Behind her, Efua rushed forward. Let me see. Her eyes widened as she dropped to her knees, scooping the gold into her hands. This is more than the bracelet. This is everything. Ya stood back frozen. Her eyes were fixed on the water. It shouldn't be like this, she murmured. It shouldn't be this easy. But Ajoa only smiled. Nothing worth having is ever easy, she said. We simply took what was ours. Within days, everything changed. Their once empty compound filled with goods, fine cloth, polished beads, baskets overflowing with food. Traders who had once ignored them now greeted them with respect. Neighbors who had barely spoken their names now came with forced smiles and curious eyes. Fortune has finally found you, one woman said, though her tone carried suspicion. Ajoa accepted the praise without hesitation. Efua basked in it. Only Ya'a lowered her gaze, unable to meet the eyes of those who asked too many questions. But wealth like a shadow brings its own darkness. The first sign came at night. Ya was the first to hear it. A soft sound, like water moving where no water should be. She sat up abruptly, her heart pounding. Do you hear that? She whispered. Efua groaned from her mat. Hear what? Go back to sleep. But Ya couldn't, because beneath the quiet of the night, she heard it again. A voice, faint, distant, calling. Ya. Her breath caught in her throat. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, that's not real. But the voice came again, clearer this time. Ya. She covered her ears, her body trembling. Stop, please stop. Across the room, Ajoa opened her eyes slowly. What is wrong with you? She asked sharply. Ya turned to her, tears forming. She's calling me. Silence fell. Efua sat up now, her expression hardening. Don't start this, she said. Abena is gone. Ya shook her head desperately. No, I heard her. I swear I heard her. Ajoa's voice cut through the fear like a blade. Then stopped listening. Ya stared at her. How can you be so calm? Ajoa sat up fully, her gaze steady, because fear feeds on weakness. And I refused to be weak. But even as she spoke, something shifted. Outside, the wind rose suddenly. The trees swayed, and from the direction of the river came a sound. Low, deep, unnatural. The next day, the villagers began to notice. The river is rising, an old man said, pointing toward the bank. Too fast. Another woman frowned. It has not rained. Children were called indoors. Fishermen hesitated to cast their nets. Something was wrong. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the water crept further than it ever had before, licking at the edges of the land, inching closer to the village, like a living thing searching for something lost. Ya stood at the edge of the compound, staring at the distant shimmer. She's not gone, she whispered. Efua crossed her arms. Enough. But Ya turned to her, her voice breaking. We didn't just take gold. We took something from the river. Ajoa stepped forward, her tone cold and final. And the river has already paid us. As if in response. The ground beneath them trembled slightly, not enough to knock them down, but enough to remind them. Something was waking, and far beyond their sight, beneath the darkening surface of the water, the river began to remember. They say when a spirit is wronged, it does not rush for revenge. It waits until the night is quiet enough for truth to be heard. That night, the village did not sleep. The wind howled like a warning carried from another world. The river, once calm and obedient, roared with a voice no one had ever heard before. It was not the sound of water alone, it was something deeper, something ancient, something angry. Inside their compound, the three sisters sat in silence. Ya's hands would not stop trembling. This is not normal, she whispered. The river has never sounded like this. Efua paced back and forth, her jaw clenched. It's just the current. The rains must have come upstream. There has been no rain, Ya replied, her voice breaking. Ajoa stood near the doorway, staring into the darkness beyond. Her face remained unreadable, but her fingers tightened slightly at her sides. Then a sudden crash. The door burst open as a rush of cold air swept inside. The fire flickered wildly, nearly dying, before flaring back to life. And with it came the sound, water. But not from outside, from within. A thin stream began to creep across the floor, glistening under the firelight. Ya gasped. No, no, no. Efwa stepped back. How is this possible? The water spread slowly, deliberately, as if it knew exactly where it was going. Then the voice came, low, echoing. Not from one direction, but from everywhere. Return. What was taken? Ya screamed, covering her ears. Make it stop. Efwa shook her head wildly. This is madness. It's not real. But the voice grew stronger. Return. What was taken? Ajoa stepped forward, her voice sharp. We took nothing. The river gave it to us. The water surged slightly at her words, and then it rose, not high enough to drown, but enough to touch, enough to reach. A sudden force shot across the room, wrapping around Efwa's ankles like unseen hands. She gasped. Ajoa. Help me, Ya, scrambled backward, sobbing. It's taking her. It's taking her. Efwa clawed at the ground, her nails scraping against the floor as she was dragged toward the doorway. No, no, please, her voice broke into screams. Ajoa grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back. Hold on, but the force was stronger, far stronger. The water surged again, and in one violent motion, Efwa was pulled out into the darkness. Her scream echoed once, then vanished. Silence followed, a heavy, suffocating silence. Ya collapsed onto the wet floor, shaking uncontrollably. It's happening. It's really happening. Ajoa stood frozen, her chest rising and falling rapidly. For the first time, fear, real fear, cracked through her control. Outside, the village was in chaos. People ran from their homes as the river spilled beyond its banks, flooding paths and swallowing land. The sky above churned with dark clouds, though no rain fell, only wind, and the distant rumble of something unseen. It's the river, someone shouted. It's angry. An elder fell to his knees, raising his hands. We have offended it. Someone has broken the balance. Back in the compound, Ya crawled toward Ajoa, her voice barely a whisper. We have to tell them, she said. We have to tell the truths. Ajoa shook her head slowly, though her eyes betrayed her. No, if we do that, everything we have is already gone, Ya cried. Efwa is gone. The room seemed to pulse with the weight of her words. Outside, the river roared louder, closer, as if listening, as if waiting. Then the voice returned, stronger, clearer. Two remain. Ya let out a broken sob. Ajoa closed her eyes for a brief moment, and for the first time since the gold touched her hands, she began to understand. This was never a gift, it was a debt, and the river had only just begun to collect. They say the truth rises like water. No matter how deep you bury it, it will find its way to the surface. By dawn, the village of Ankobra Bend was no longer the same. The river had swallowed parts of the land, leaving behind mud-broken paths and fear that clung to every doorway. People gathered in the center of the village, their voices low, their eyes searching for answers. No one dared to speak aloud. It did not stop at the banks, one man said, shaking his head. The river crossed into our homes. An old woman raised her voice. This is not nature. This is judgment. And in the middle of them all stood Ya. Her clothes were soaked, her face pale, her spirit shattered under the weight she could no longer carry. Ajoa stood a few steps behind her, silent, her jaw tight, her pride still clinging to what little control she believed she had left. Speak, one of the elders commanded, his staff striking the ground. If you know something, you must say it now. Ya's lips trembled. Her eyes searched the crowd faces she had known all her life, now filled with fear, suspicion, and expectation. She swallowed hard. We took something, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. The murmurs spread instantly. Took what? From where? Ya's voice broke. From the river. Silence fell like a sudden storm. Adjoa stepped forward sharply. But Ya turned, her tears falling freely now. No, I can't lie anymore. She faced the villagers again, her hands shaking. It wasn't just gold, she said. It was Abena. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Some stepped back, others covered their mouths. The youngest, someone whispered. The one who always sat by the water. Ya nodded, her body trembling. We pushed her into the river. For gold. The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Adjoa closed her eyes briefly, as if trying to shut out the reality now, laid bare before everyone. You have brought death into this village, the elder said slowly, his voice filled with sorrow, and now the river has come to claim its due. As if summoned by his words, the ground trembled. A deep rolling sound rose from the river, louder than before, closer than ever. The villagers turned as one. The water surged forward, not wildly, but with purpose. It parted slightly at the edge, and from its depths, something began to rise. A figure, slowly, gracefully, wrapped in the shimmer of water and light. Ya fell to her knees. Abena! There she stood, not as she had been, but not entirely gone. Her skin glowed faintly, her eyes deep and endless, like the river itself. The bracelet still rested on her wrist, now pulsing with a soft golden light. The village held its breath. Abena's gaze moved across the crowd, until it settled on her sisters. On Ya first. There was pain in her expression, but also something else. Understanding. Then her eyes shifted to Adjoa, and the warmth disappeared. Why? Abena's voice echoed, not loud, but carried by the water itself. Adjoa stepped forward, her pride, struggling against the fear rising within her. We did what we had to, she said, though her voice wavered. We were tired of having nothing. Abena tilted her head slightly. And so you chose to have everything. By taking me, Adjoa clenched her fists. You were always the favored one. The river chose you. No, Abena said softly. I listened. You only wanted. The water around her stirred. Ya cried out, bowing her head. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Abena. I didn't stop them. I should have stopped them. Abena looked at her, and for a moment, the river seemed to soften. Regret does not erase what was done, she said gently. But it can change what comes next. Then her gaze returned to Adjoa. And you, Adjoa, stood still, silent, unyielding. I have nothing to regret, she said. The river responded instantly. The water surged upward, wrapping around her like living chains. Adjoa gasped, struggling as it lifted her from the ground. No, her voice broke as she was pulled toward the river. This is not justice. Abena's voice remained calm. This is balance. And with that, the river claimed her. Ya screamed, reaching out, but it was too late. The water closed, and Adjoa was gone. Only the sound of the river remained, steady, endless, watching, waiting. They say when the storm passes, the land looks the same. But the people are never unchanged. By the next morning, the river had returned to its banks. The waters that once roared with fury now flowed quietly as if nothing had happened. The broken paths remained. The soaked earth still carried the scent of upheaval, but the river itself wore a calm face once more. As it always did, as it always would, the villagers gathered once again, this time not in fear, but in silence. No one dared to speak loudly near the water. Even the children who once played along its edge now stayed close to their homes, watching from a distance, because now they understood the river was not just a source of life, it was a keeper of truth, and truth cannot be drowned. Ya sat alone at the edge of the village, her eyes hollow, her body still, but her mind restless. The gold that once filled their compound was gone, vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. In its place was emptiness. not just of wealth, but of peace. She stared at her hands, remembering how they had done nothing when it mattered most. I should have stopped them, she whispered for what felt like the 1,000th time. But the wind carried no answer, only the soft, endless sound of water. Days turned into weeks, weeks into seasons, and still Ya remained. She worked harder than anyone in the village, not for praise, not for reward, but because she believed suffering was the only thing she had left to offer. When others rested, she labored. When others laughed, she stayed silent. Some said she was cursed. Others said she was paying a debt. But the elders said she was learning. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the river in gold, Ya returned to the place where everything had begun. Her steps were slow, careful, respectful. She knelt at the edge of the water, her reflection trembling with the current. I remember, she said softly. I remember everything. The river flowed on. I cannot undo what I did, she continued. But I will not forget, not ever. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a ripple, small, gentle. It spread outward from where her reflection touched the water, distorting her image before settling again. Ya lowered her head. It was not forgiveness, but it was not rejection either. And for the first time since that night, she allowed herself to breathe. They say the river does not punish without reason, and it does not forgive without change. In the years that followed, the story of the 4 sisters became a warning whispered across villages and passed from one generation to the next. They betrayed their own blood for gold, the elders would say, their voices heavy with meaning. And the river remembered. Because what is taken through greed will always demand a price. And what is buried in silence will always rise in truth. So when you stand by the water and it seems calm and it seems quiet, listen closely. For beneath that stillness lies memory. And memory never forgets. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories like this.